My name is Fred Marks. I'm going to be your moderator for today's seminar. Local laws 84 and 87, also called the Greener, Greater Building Plan, are the cornerstone of New York City's efforts to make New York a leader in green energy. At this seminar, you'll learn about how energy usage and sourcing are monitored, deadlines for compliance, and how your building can take advantage of local and state incentives to save money and energy. We have a panel of experts here to help us discuss this topic, and I'd like to introduce you to them right now. To my immediate left, we have Alan Grothier of Benchmark Help. Alan is the manager of the New York City Benchmarking Help Center, which is a free service provided by New York City to help property owners comply with the benchmark law. Next to Alan, we have David Levy, Director of Operations at IAG Energy. IAG Energy specializes in energy efficiency and energy compliance, and they help buildings with New York City energy laws. And next to David, we have Ali Levine, Program Manager at New York City Retrofit Accelerator. The format for today's seminar, we have a series of questions that we're going to pose to our panel, and then after our questions, we're going to leave some time at the end for some questions and answer from the audience. So if you have any questions, hold them until the end, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So for our first question, we'd like to ask Alan Grothier. Alan, tell us a little bit about what benchmarking is, why it's important, and how it impacts multifamily buildings in New York City.
Okay, am I on? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Fred. The benchmarking law was introduced in 2009 as part of the Greener, Greater Buildings Plan, and it was the first attempt for the city to try to gain an inventory of energy use throughout the city. As anybody in management knows, you can't manage what you can't measure, so the first step is to try to collect some information about how energy is being used throughout the city in buildings. And buildings account for about 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions in New York City, so it's very important to focus on what buildings are doing and what kind of energy they're using. The benchmarking process is a relatively simple one. It just requires you to describe your building a little bit and to collect your energy data from your utilities who are providing it from DEP for your water use as well. And the way this is used is there are multiple uses. One is for the city itself. The city has a gross inventory then of energy use throughout the city on an annual basis, and to the extent that the city is trying to achieve an 80 by 50, an 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, to be able to understand what kind of progress is being made is very important. On top of it, because benchmarking does provide for different statistics for different kinds of buildings, different uses, hospitals, hotels, residences, whatever, it does allow for comparison within certain sectors to, first of all, understand relative use of energy across different buildings, but also to help the city understand where the greatest needs are, where the greatest energy reductions might be achieved. But this benchmarking also has an advantage for property owners as well, because you get to track your own use from year over year, and you get to see if you're if you do a retrofit, if you make some changes into your building, have you actually achieved energy reductions? So this is a benefit that you can get for yourself to be able to understand your energy use a lot better. Moreover, when the city takes its benchmarking results overall, it publishes them in a public disclosure spreadsheet. So if you wanted to do a little bit of spreadsheet crunching, you could actually try to find buildings that are comparable to your own and see how you stand up, see whether you're actually not so good or you are much better than others, and it gives you a sense of ranking within your building. I think that's about good for now. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. We'll move to a question for David Levy of IAG Energy. And David, what is an energy audit, and how does it differ, if in fact it does differ, from an energy assessment?
Thank you, Fred. An energy audit and an assessment are just two interchangeable words. They're basically the same thing. And that really picks up where you left off. Mayor Bloomberg instituted some energy laws, Local Law 84 and 87 for the city of New York. His main, I wasn't in his head, but I can imagine he had two main reasons. One is, of course, for to make the city greener and for the environment. But there's also a real financial aspect to the city. The grid is overtaxed, demand is high. He was very forward-thinking. He saw that the population is just growing. He instituted bike lanes and was very proactive for his bikes. So he saw that there's only so much that the grid can sustain. So if we make sure that that building owners and managers are only using the amount that they should be using and they're reducing their energy, it'll be helpful for everyone. This translates, in fact, to savings for the actual owners as well. So when you start off with the annual benchmarking where you're just keeping track of what you're using, I believe that was Mayor Bloomberg's line, that you can't manage what you can't measure. So that gives you a snapshot of what you're using, and right away you could see, when I compare to other buildings, am I wasting energy? So you don't necessarily know how, but you know that you're wasting. The main law is Local Law 87, and that's once every 10 years, where you have to get a full ASHRAE Level 2 audit done to your building. That's where an engineer or a certified auditor comes down, analyzes all the systems in your building, shows you exactly where you're wasting energy, what you could do to improve. The law requires that there are certain things that must be fixed in order to be in compliance, and there are certain things you don't have to be fixed, but they're recommended. And that's where the manager or the owner has the ability to see, okay, this is where I could see how much, basically how much it'll cost me, how much I'll save, and what my ROI will be. And that's essentially what an assessment is.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David. Next question is for Ali Levine of New York City Retrofit Accelerator. And Ali, tell us a bit about the Retrofit Accelerator and its relevance to New York City's co-ops, condos, and HOA communities.
Sure. Thank you. So the Retrofit Accelerator is a free program provided by the City of New York to provide advisory services for owners, co-op board members, condos, basically any decision maker in privately owned buildings to help get energy upgrades done. We found that, building on what David was saying, that people were doing these energy audits as part of Local Law 87, but weren't necessarily taking the next step, the voluntary next step, to do upgrades in their buildings. And we wanted to provide a service to help people, take a look at their audit, understand what is the best opportunity for their building at the time, and really provide one-on-one assistance in the form of our efficiency advisors to equip them with the tools and knowledge to actually get projects done. Just as disclaimer, I am coming from the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. I'm not actually one of the efficiency advisors, but Andre, who's in the audience, is, and he helps to, him and the rest of the staff actually help to work to understand your building's needs, the capacity and desire to actually undertake projects, and then to evaluate what incentives or financing are actually available and get in contact with the right contractors, and then really act as your advocate along the way. Specifically with condos and co-ops and HOAs, we work very closely with a lot of condos and co-ops and HOAs in New York City, coming actually to board meetings, helping to walk through what the next step is, and or compare proposals or bids to help make sure that you're getting all the information, you're comparing apples to apples. And a very big part of our pipeline actually is these kinds of buildings. So we have a lot of experience understanding what the very unique needs are of condos, co-ops, and HOAs. So we're just a service to basically help you and be your advocate along the way to actually implement energy efficiency projects.
Great, thank you, Ali. Back to a question for Alan Groth here. Alan, what does the Help Center do, and how can co-op, condo, and HOA communities make use of your services and resources?
Okay, one thing I omitted to mention in my first answer is the fact that the law that was passed in 2009 was modified last year such that the requirement that used to be for buildings 50,000 square feet or over has now been reduced, so that as of next year, the the requirement to benchmark will fall to buildings 25,000 square feet or greater. So if anybody doesn't know that, that's important to know. And from the point of view of the help center, as when that law was changed, there was also a clause written into the law that required the city to provide help for people who had to benchmark by phone and by email. So the Benchmarking Help Center had previous incarnations, but in its current state was instituted at the beginning of last year. And we provide free help. We have a small staff, but we answer the phones, we answer emails, and we provide any information that you need to get the benchmarking process done. Now, the benchmarking process does require a computer. It requires using an online application. But the good news is that in the coming year, both Con Edison and National Grid have agreed, and they are going to provide a way to automatically upload your whole building data. So there's no bothering of tenants. There's no collection of bills. You'll go through a simple authorization process on their websites, go through a few other steps that we will be glad to help you with, and you will be able to have your energy data from Con Ed and National Grid automatically uploaded into this online application called Portfolio Manager. Now, what we do is we do a soup to nuts. We will help you at any stage along the way. We have had people come and say, what is benchmarking? And we've spent an hour or two or three on the phone with them. We have people who have very simple questions, and we're very happy to sort of provide simple answers when necessary. But the key to remember is that we are available by phone, by email. We have a booth in row 5, I believe, and you're welcome to stop by and pick up contact information. But if you need to write down one thing, our homepage website is nyc.gov/benchmarking, where you can find out more about the law. You can find out the procedures you have to follow, and you'll be able to find out how to reach us if you need help.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question for David Levy. David, how are the results of an audit compiled and delivered to the board and manager?
Well, I actually brought a sample report with me. It's quite thick. It's extensive. It has more than you'd ever want to know about the energy in your building. But it's actually delivered in 3 steps. The first step is what I mentioned before, was just things you're required to fix by law. So that's much more concise. We basically break that down. The engineers will go down and tell us in very complicated engineering language what has to get fixed. And then we type up a report that makes it very simple for the manager to see, okay, this is exactly what I need to do. This is who needs to do it, and done. Once those fixes are done, then we bring it back to the engineer. It might be a follow-up audit to make sure everything was done correctly. And the engineer will put together the tools, basically the report for the city. It's also very highly technical. But the third thing, which is this is the full report. This has everything technical and simple. This includes all the things that I mentioned before, the things that you had to do, what was done, in addition to all the recommendations. And included is this one piece of paper that has all of this in one little spreadsheet. And it basically says, these are all the measures, everything that was recommended and has to get done. This is how much you'll save in electricity, how much you'll save in gas. This is total cost savings. This is how much it'll cost you to fix it. Then it shows you the net measure cost, how long it will last, like when you're going to have to replace it, your IRR, and your payback. So what's your IRR? And if you look for some of these things, your payback is in 3 months. And some of them it's 22 years. So you make the right. So you basically make the decision, what's best for you to cut back on. And it's yours for your keeping. And we give you all the tools. Anything we send to the city, we also give you for your records. You have everything.
Okay. Next question for Ali. Ali, what are some of the common measures that condos have adopted that participate with the retrofit accelerator program?
Sure. So I would say that three of some of the most common measures tend to be lighting upgrades, heating system and distribution upgrades, and then another one that might not be the most commonly implemented but is the most popular to investigate is actually solar installations. And those are also, especially the first two, lighting and heating, some of the most common actual recommendations in the audit. So one thing I want to clarify, what we tend to work on are those kind of voluntary upgrades to the system, whereas something that is great for buildings to do anytime, not just every 10 years, are what's required in the audit are really just making sure your systems work the way that they're supposed to. And so what we really work on is making them work better, and making fixes and upgrades that make them work better. And so starting with lighting, we find that lighting, it's a great kind of segue into the world of energy efficiency and really understanding how quickly you can realize the results, and it tends to have a very good payback, and there are a lot of incentives available through Con Ed. I'll talk a bit more about that next, but and also one other thing to be aware of is that the city also has a law that that buildings over 25,000 square feet have to upgrade their lighting in their common areas and commercial spaces by 2025. And they have to upgrade it to the current code at the time that they actually do the upgrade. So, we really want to help people understand if you do it now, it's going to be a lot easier to comply than to do it in 2025 when the code will inevitably get a lot more stringent. So, it's one of the things that we see a lot happen going on in the city. Heating distribution and system upgrades are another big one. We actually have a specific campaign around it. We've done a lot of work to make these solutions easier. One of the most common things we hear in the winter is that people are opening their windows in the winter. It's so counterintuitive, it's kind of silly, but it happens. We have these old steam systems that were built for coal. Coal burns a lot slower than oil or gas, and so the whole system just needs some tweaks and upgrades to actually make it work better. And so we've tried to make that process a lot easier. To find the right contractors, to go back to your engineering firm, and so it's a really good one. It just really helps the comfort of your units as well. And finally, for solar, it's a pretty great opportunity to often have lower cost electricity than you can get from the grid, and there are a couple of good opportunities right now. There's the state has incentives that eventually will ratchet down over time, so taking advantage now, and tax credits that are always kind of questionable whether they'll be renewed, so kind of get them while they're there. And there's a few other opportunities that are out there that we're happy to walk you through. These are the kinds of things that we talk through. We look at your audit and say, oh, these are the opportunities that exist right now that are good to take advantage of. There's group purchasing for solar and things that we're happy to connect you with. But I think those are three of the things to start thinking about when thinking about energy efficiency.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellie. We have one more round of questions, then we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience here. And so, David, you get the next. Alan, you get the next question. Alan, what are some of the important upcoming deadlines and filing dates that co-ops, condo boards, and managers should be aware of?
Okay. The way this works is that, in fact, many of you, or if your building is within the 25 and 50,000 square feet range, you may have received a notice from the Department of Buildings over the past week notifying you that you're likely to be subject to this law. Now, the likely was a fudge because the official list of those buildings that are required to benchmark is published in early February. It's called the Covered Buildings List, and it's available online. If you can't find it, you can let us know, but you should be able to get it again from that nyc.gov/benchmarking I mentioned. At that time, also, Con Edison and National Grid are going to be prepared for the first time to provide this automated upload of your whole building energy data. And so the benchmarking season really starts in February for, in terms of knowing that you have to benchmark, and all the documentation and all the procedures and all the automated uploads are going to be in place. The deadline, which is really important to know, is May 1st, and this is an annual deadline. You must, by May 1st, submit your benchmarking report to the city, or you'll be subject to a violation and fine of $500 at this point in time. To make things give you more incentive to get it in on time, every quarter that you haven't submitted a benchmarking report, you are subject to another violation and another $500 fine. So if you don't benchmark at all, it can cost you $2,000 a year. So this is something that the city takes very seriously. They want it done because they're going to fine you if you don't do it. The one thing I want to say over and above this is that because the law changed, because there are new buildings coming on board to the tune of 10,000 new buildings will be required to benchmark as a result of the change in the law next year, we at the Help Center really are hoping that a lot of you will get started early. And so we have actually defined something called what we call a Jump Start program, where we encourage you to call us today, tomorrow, sometime soon, and we'll help you get your account set up in Portfolio Manager, which is the online application that you use. We'll give you some guidance as to what kind of information you need to collect about your building, and we will help you have everything set in place so that your property is set up, your account is set up, and come February, when the data is available for your energy, it's just a matter of going through the procedures to set up to collect that data and submitting your report to the city, and you'll be done. So we're trying to facilitate it for our own benefit, because we're expecting a lot of calls come February time, and also for your benefit, so that you can get familiar with it, so you realize what you're up against. And really, for most people, it's not the biggest problem, but everybody always has a question. So again, please call us. Call us today if you want, or not today because we're not answering the phone because we're here. But anyway, please be sure to be on top of this and let us know how we can help. And I was going to say one more thing, but I think I'll just forget it right now. But anyway, thank you very much. And we will also be at the advice table from 2 to 3 this afternoon if you have specific questions, or you can find our table here at the convention center.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much, Alan. David, how do private firms like yours interact with city agencies when it comes to benchmarking, compliance, and so forth?
Thank you. Actually, you have to be a little careful what I say. I'm sitting in between two city representatives. That's a good question. I would say there are definitely managers or owners who are not as comfortable dealing with the city. I would say the best comparison would be, you have a sports agent, you have Sports Star, and he has an agent, and he doesn't negotiate his own $100 million contract for 5 years, because there's a difference between asking for $100 million for yourself or negotiating for somebody else. And we definitely play a large role in terms of interacting between the city and managers and owners. We have an open relationship with the Department of Buildings. We're constantly in touch with them for all the buildings that we're managing for energy. And for us, it's no big deal to discuss a violation, an issue, something that comes up, because it's just part of our relationship with them. And building owners and managers really, appreciate that. They enjoy that they have that buffer. But in addition, the city does keep us aware of any updates and changes to the laws. We're invited because they know that we do so many submissions annually, so they send us, invitations to, exclusive meetings in the city. I mean, there'll be 100 people in the room, but out of, now that we're adding 10,000 buildings, there'll be over 20,000 buildings, covered under this law. 100 people, we're one of those people in the meeting that we, are kept up to date with everything that's going on. And that's basically how we interact.
Right. Excellent. One more question, and then we'll open up for Q&A. And Ali, you get the last question here. What are some incentives and finance options that can help buildings make upgrades and improve their energy use profile?
So I mentioned a couple of available incentives for solar, and Con Ed has for lighting, and there's a litany of programs that can incentivize most measures that you might be interested in the city. We actually are about to launch, it should be about tomorrow, kind of an interactive tool on the website where you can check off what you're interested in doing, what your building type is, and actually see the incentives that are available. But the best source for that information really is the efficiency advisors as well. And what we try to do is actually maintain relationships with the utilities, with the state, the providers of these incentives, to make sure that not only you get access to them, but that this process is streamlined and there's communication, because sometimes we see some hiccups and we want to avoid that as best as possible. And then if the incentives aren't enough, there are a lot of different financing options that are available, all different kinds of innovative options. You can go back to your line of credit, you can go to a direct financing provider, or there are leasing arrangements or other opportunities. And we actually have a partner on the program, the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, or NYSEC, that act as kind of our financing advisor. So if you're interested in financing a project, if it's a lot of times it makes sense to do a bigger scope of work at one time because you get the best savings and you don't have to deal with a litany of construction or of projects. And so if that is the best option, they can talk through what the different ways that you can actually pay for it are. So there are a lot of different ways to make sure that you can get the work done that you need.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ali. We have a great panel here. Do we have some questions from the audience that we'd like to ask her? Yes, sir.
Hi, I have a smaller building, 14,000 square feet. Could I still get an audit, and what might that cost?
You asking?
Anybody?
So, I guess just generally, can't speak to the cost, but anybody can get an audit. It's just required for buildings that are slightly larger. As David mentioned, the larger buildings are required to get what's called an ASHRAE Level 2 audit, which has a litany of requirements and all of that. But sometimes you don't need that full, deep assessment for a smaller building that might have somewhat simpler systems. So you can still go to David's company, to any of the energy auditors out there, and actually just have a conversation of what kind of assessment you need. Anybody can get one. As far as cost, it depends. I can't really speak to that.
We could often just have a conversation over the phone and be able to establish what areas in your building could be improved on, what areas are probably wasting energy. And then if after a conversation you determine that, it seems like there's something there, we would send someone down. And it's not as intensive an audit, but essentially it's a review of your building, of everything energy related and how you could save money.
Okay, great. Next question.
Is the city incentive program separate from NYSERDA, or you can get both? And I want to follow up.
So my apology if I wasn't clear. So we don't provide direct incentives. We're really just a free advisory service. So you can definitely participate with us and with any, at the same time as any other program. We'll actually help you kind of make sure that you can gain access to the NYSERDA, the state and the NYSERDA incentive. So it's separate, and we don't provide the direct incentives. We provide kind of like that person to help you.
I wanted to understand if the city has an incentive program to improvement.
We don't.
The city doesn't. But
no, we don't have a direct.
What about the incentive program that you're talking about?
So the incentive programs that we're talking about are offered through Con Ed, National Grid, NYSERDA. We just help kind of gain access to them and make sure that it's the right one. So we're more of a guidance and advisory service. It's not an incentive.
Okay, so perhaps you can speak in this. What the incentive program that NYSERDA have that you would get credit for, is the fund run out, or is it funded forever until all buildings are complete or complied with?
I believe that right now it's in a 3-year funding cycle, so it's not, the funding does change over time, and that's part of why we're here, is to keep tabs and all that, and make sure that, just be able to give the most up-to-date information. So the funding has not run out. There is funding right now in the multifamily performance program for the main path for market rate buildings is through their comprehensive programs. You have to save at least 20% of your building's energy in order to gain access to that program.
Okay, another question right here.
Okay, I'm just curious about the Local 87, the booklet you were showing, the very thick booklet. Do all buildings have that? Or is it just with 25,000?
That's only buildings 50,000 square feet and larger are
And
subject
what's,
to that law.
I mean, I'm not clear on how much square footage our building has. We're in an 82-unit building.
Yeah, if you're an 82, yeah, you're over.
That would be?
Yeah.
So there
you
would, somewhere there would be a
Well-
booklet for our building then, right?
Well, actually, half the buildings in the cities have not yet been required to comply. The way it works is you look at your block number, and the last digit of your block tells you what year you have to comply. So if the last digit of your block is a 7, you'd have to comply this year. If it's an 8, you'd have to comply next year. And sometimes that happens, that you don't know you have to comply until you get a letter that you got a violation. But the city does send out, just like they send out for Local 84, I believe they do send out notices for Local 87 as well. But you could be proactive and just look at your block number and say, oh, we're doing 2 years, I didn't even know.
So where do I go for that?
You can also, like, you can call us and we can look pretty quickly to see what
Okay.
what year
Okay, I'll
what
get-
year you're up.
okay, thank you.
And then, yes, oftentimes if you have a property manager, sometimes they take care of this. It's also just kind of touching base with them to see if they've received a report. But again, just give us a call, or our website is nyc.gov/retrofit accelerator, or get Andre's card. nyc.gov/retrofit accelerator. I know it's a mouthful at times.
Okay, we have another question back here.
When it comes to going beyond the benchmarking, who is generally taking like the proactive lead in any efficiency measures? Is it the management company or the board, or how does that work?
Do you want me to? You can go ahead.
Either way. Well, that really depends on the building, but it seems like, I don't know if we're picking up, that we essentially do similar things. That where the city acts as an advisory board to point you in different directions, we'll do the same thing on a granular scale for our clients. And then it's whoever's, responsible for the, I suppose for making those decisions. They could decide, they look at, example, they'll look at this, piece of paper and decide on their own, what do they want to do, what do they want to implement, and they'll go from there. Did you want
I
to?
think, so we find it, again, as David said, it does vary from building to building, often, especially in condos and co-ops where, there's somebody on the board or somebody in the building that's particularly proactive. They often act as a really good advocate, and we work very closely with them. I think from property managers, again, it's the same thing. If it's a particularly proactive person, but they'll always bring us to the board. And I think we do similar things, but often it'll end up that we end up referring to some kind of engineering firm that then takes over that advisement. But it depends, and we're happy to work with whoever that person is, whether it's the property manager or the co-op board member or shareholder that's interested.
Any more questions?
David? No, Alan, sorry. No, David, sorry. You showed us a specific data sheet of how you can improve, the payback and so forth. Is that something that every engineering company does if they are, because it's a very good thing. I don't know, I can't read those numbers. We have
Right.
benchmarking and all these numbers. What do they mean? I don't really know.
Right. I put it this way, I'm not familiar with every other company out there and what they do, but I know just from our own experience and the specific engineers that we work with that, no, not all engineers are equipped to be able to put this together. Most companies that I'm aware of, their focus really is compliance. You have this law that you must comply with, and you'll get a huge fine if you don't. And that really is the focus of a lot of companies. Let's just get you in compliance and move on with your life so that you can, go on to managing your building. Just our approach is to take it to the next step, that you're not just in compliance, but you're also saving money. You also see how it actually helps you save money.
That's my problem, from
Right.
benchmarking, I can't read it.
I think, one thing what we generally recommend, especially when embarking on starting your compliance, is to go out to at least 3 companies that do energy audits or will provide you with this report, and see what they'll do for you. And then if they don't, and ask specifically, like, how are you going to present this information to me? And if it's not particularly readable or informative, then maybe they're not the best company for you. So, I think it's a little bit more work, but in the long run, it can pan out in the end because, it's so important the way that you get information, and that's kind of why we existed, is because all those companies that just wanted to just do compliance and nothing really actionable, we want to help interpret that. But if you get something like this, it should be easier.
One more question. Now, if we present those benchmarking data to you, David, you can interpret it for a fee?
Even without a fee. Yeah, so I was answering, we could have, conversations on the phone. You definitely get a lot of information just from talking to us. When you benchmark, you get an Energy Star score, and that score will tell you, where your building rates in comparison to other buildings. So right away, if you're hemorrhaging energy.
Yeah, but they're all sort of wasting energy. I know that. They're old buildings, so it's not like a good comparison how we can improve,
Right, so then you want to take it.
Super says, oh, we're fine, we're just like the other building.
We're all bad.
Right, exactly. So then you want to take it to the next steps, and how I know we're losing a lot of, we're wasting energy. How do we save? So then we show you the next steps you could take to save.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions.
Hi, I wanted to ask specifically regarding complying, I'm sorry, let me think about this. Converting the boiler systems, upgrading it to, now I believe that the latest one is you must be in compliance with number 2 oil or convert to gas soon enough. So if and when a building does go through this transition, I believe there has been given some grace period. I wanted to know if there are changes in the rules for that. What should we look for as property board members and managers, and what is the new grace period, if there is, and anything we should watch out for in terms of vendors who are providing, benchmarking services during this period? Thank you.
So the requirement right now is that you must convert off of number 4 heating oil by 2030. There is no plans right now for a grace period after that because, that's, we have 13.
I mean the grace period for when the building is actually converting, that year that they're converting from number 4 to number 2, or converting completely to gas. What is the wait period? You can't audit when something's down.
You have to benchmark.
That's what I'm
We have a question for you.
Well, it's still in 87.
I know for 84, do they have to benchmark during that year if they're converting?
Yes, you certainly
Because-
do. Presumably, you're going to be having heat throughout the year.
It changes when when you're doing the conversion. There's no waiting it out a little bit. Because what if the building needs to go to an outside boiler?
Not for the annual benchmarking, if, as long as you can measure the energy that was used in your building for that year, then you can report it. Again, I'm not sure what would happen during a conversion. Presumably, you've got something operating at all times, and so as soon as the oil cuts off and you have the gas starting, that would just provide the continuity, and you have the ability to be able to say that this meter is is inactive as of the date that the fuel oil burner stops burning, and you can set the activation date for the gas when that actually starts. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think it's covered. Theoretically, you're just going to, whatever energy you're using in the building is subject to reporting, and presumably that even during a transition, you'll either stop using one and start using another, or maybe you just won't use anything for a given period of time.
So they'll essentially account for that lag, that difference of those shutdown months.
Who's they?
Meaning when they do the audit, right? You have 12 months out of the year. There are months that the system is on, but then there are months that the system's off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, ideally, you would upgrade when the system's not in full operation.
Summer's a good time
right?
to.
But it doesn't always pan out that way financially or decision-wise by the owners and board members of the property. So if the building is if the boiler units are upgraded during a later time of the year, and they have a remote, they have to hire out a boiler outside of the building, like to run the heat for the building. how does, is there any adjustment for that? Because you're not on the same system, you're no longer operating on the same system.
Understood, but and again, I'm not sure if we're talking about the annual benchmarking law or the local law 87 thing, but from the annual benchmarking law, presumably, in order to get the fuel to get that outside heat, there'll be some level of payment that you would have to make, or there's some level of consumption that you're using to provide that heat, that you would be part of your benchmarking report.
So it doesn't exactly, but that'll be a slightly different type of efficiency because you're not looking at your system.
But again, the local law 84, or what's now the local law 133 of 2016, it's just a collection of information. So it's an inventory. So, to get down to that level of detail for this kind of report is not something that anybody really worries about. It's really more the large-scale piece. And from an individual building perspective, really what you're going to want to see is the benchmarking report from the year before you did the conversion and the benchmarking report for the year after it. And the one that's the transition one is probably not going to be quite as useful. I hope I'm answering your question.
With that, I have to bring this seminar to a close. A round of applause for our great panel, please. They'll be hanging around here for a few minutes, so if you have some questions, feel free to come up and talk with them. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, everybody.